Order, order. I invite Hal Williams to move the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Henderson, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship on this debate on cavity wall insulation. I might even say this is yet another case of déjà vu, given that I've been here before in 2017, 2014, with a similar debate, and alas, some of the problems have not been remedied. Just to explain briefly, very briefly, to those who may not be familiar with cavity wall insulation, it's a scheme in order to fill the cavity between the exterior and internal skin of a house with the material which insulates and then keeps heat in. And it's a very commendable way of doing things, if circumstances allow. Unfortunately, in most of Western Britain, because of wind-driven rain mainly, and the high rainfall, what happens is that the wind drives rain in through any cracks, any faults in the exterior coating of the house, and the cavity wall insulation acts as a bridge, which then transmits the water into the house, leading to damp, mould, and a host of other problems. Now, I won't go into that any further, though I've become slightly expert at its functioning, given the number of times I've looked at this. The scheme was financed with money from the government, from the green initiatives that the government had at the time, and seemed to be particularly targeted at people of modest means, people who perhaps were older or were disabled. In fact, so many times I've heard people who've had these damp problems say that a man came to the door and he said, this is a government scheme, it'll save you £350 per year and it's free, can we put it in? Whereupon most people said yes, of course, because they imagined it was guaranteed and certain to work and suitable for their premises and also suitable for the area that they were living in. And, you know, clearly it was going to better their living conditions, to save energy and to contribute, obviously, allow them to contribute to do their bits for on climate change. Now, my area is an area where cavity wall insulation is clearly unsuitable. As I said, it has westerly winds, it has wind-driven rain, it has heavy rainfall. Many properties actually face the sea, and in fact, the very first case that I came across of cavity wall insulation problems, when we looked out the front window where the damp was coming in, we could actually see the sea. And that's one of the reasons why they had so many problems. The system failed in many ways, and the points that I'd like to address very briefly, there's no point rehearsing them because they're familiar, I think, to the Minister and to other people. But when places were assessed, allegedly assessed, in too many cases, cavity wall insulation was installed where clearly an assessment would have contraindicated it. That is, places where, for example, the rendering was very poor. I don't intend to go into individual cases because I know the Minister clearly can't take up those cases now. They're historical, and also, you know, I would be here all day if I did. But, for example, I saw one house which was a former council house bought by the tenants. It had a piece of the front rendering about the size of a fireplace missing from the front of the house, an upland site facing the sea, and rain was being driven at the bricks where the pointing was faulty and going straight through into the house, causing huge amounts of damp. Fairly typical. I asked them, had they been assessed? And they said no. They just came here and offered to do it, and we took it. The installation often was of poor quality. Again, just a very quick case where an elderly lady told me that some men came to the door late at night and said that they had one installation to do during the day and that they were very keen to help her, etc. And she was very keen to have the installation, so they put it in for her, and she said, and they did it. They were so keen, very nice lads. They put it in using torches. That is, you know, they had no lights. So installation often was poor. When one chased after installers, subsequently many had gone bust, or had become, they had closed down, or had become insolvent. Well, indeed, I'd be happy to take an installation.
I thank the Honourable
intervention
for allowing me to intervene, and he's making a very compelling argument in his remarks, and I do commend him for his steadfast work in this area over the years. Several of my constituents have contacted me after an insulation company canvassed and encouraged them to have inappropriate insulation installed in their cavity wall through the Green Homes grant into their homes. And since then, they've discovered that the wall cavity insulation was installed and it was entirely inappropriate for their properties. And they are experiencing damp and mould to their homes now. And one of my constituents told me that a surveyor had estimated that the cost of the damage to her home was around £120,000, which is substantial when you consider that the average cost of a home in my constituency is around £180,000. So in pursuing compensation for this damage, several of my constituents engaged the services of a law company called SSB Law on a no-win, no-fee basis. And after SSB Law fell into administration, the lawyers of the insulation company sent letters then to my constituents demanding that they pay legal fees which could amount to tens of thousands of pounds. And this is, quite frankly, a scandal and a disgrace, as not only do they now have considerable damage to their homes, on top of that they have to pay the additional legal costs. And so, with cowboy companies using government grants and public funds to install this unsuitable insulation, that causes this damage to their homes, does the Honourable Member and indeed the Minister agree with me that there must be an urgent investigation by the Public Accounts Committee into the misuse of public funds by these insulation companies?
Williams.
Well, I'm very grateful for that point. I mean, very succinctly she makes the case. My areas and other areas in Wales are what are called legal aid deserts or legal deserts, and that encourages people to seek out no-win, no-fee companies. In my area, we tend to go to Merseyside, Manchester, Birmingham and even London. And these are uncontrollable, and the circumstances that she outlines are really tragic. The costs of £120,000 are quite extraordinary, but damage can be very large scale indeed. Just one other point I would make about the process of installation, which I should have picked that up, in that when I've asked in the past about the review of installations, were these inspected? And apparently 5% allegedly were inspected, but to be frank, I've scarcely come across a single case where an installation has been inspected and found to be defective and then it has been resolved. I'm not saying that didn't happen, but I'm sure it could have be done much more effectively. One of the points, there is so much I could say, but one of the interesting points is that cavity wall insulation was specifically excluded from building standards when it was brought in under the scheme, so that local authorities are not responsible. People can't get redress in that way either. There is, as honourable and right honourable members possibly will know, there is a guarantee scheme, and many of my constituents who have tried to claim have found it quite difficult. I think the victims group, Sivali, tell me that there have been rumours, though not officially confirmed, I think, that the main guarantee provider, SIGA, has had financial difficulties because of the number of claims. Perhaps I can talk about that later on if I have some time. But essentially, one of the complaints is that in the small print, the guarantee says that the place must be maintained properly. And given that many of the people who installed cavity wall insulation were older or perhaps suffered some disability, they were scarcely in a situation to climb up ladders to look for micro cracks in rendering in the west-facing walls. But that maintenance clause then became very prominent in the refusal to take the matters further. As someone said once, the large print giveth and the small print taketh away, as it were. And that certainly happened for some people. As to removal and repair, Sivali, who are the victims group, say that installation and extraction should be done by separate providers, each with accredited, with proper accreditation, such as the Trustmark or BIOSCR accredited. I think the way the scheme was set up with insufficient supervision meant that, I mean, I can only call them cowboy installers, came along and sensed that there was money here and have subsequently disappeared or have gone bust. Removal is not easy, I think. I've had cases, for example, where someone has had stuff removed twice. One case I can think of, it caused dry rot as well. The dry rot was attended to twice, and when she came to try to sell the house, the probable price would have been about 180,000. I think she got about 50 because the problems were still there. I did mention Sivali, the victims group, and they have done heroic work in trying to get something done, but it remains that there are outstanding cases. I did outline that in my speech in 2017. I think it was April the 19th, 2017. And the Minister told me at the time that SIGA, the guarantee scheme, said that there were 3,663 recorded cases, 2,939 were resolved by installers, and then 724 were resolved. Now, one of the things I'm really interested in is the number and prevalence of cases, because I've come across a great number in my own constituency, but I haven't seen any official estimates of, firstly, how many installations were carried out in the first place, and how many people then have found them to be faulty, how many people have sought redress through the guarantee schemes, how many of them have been successful. I mean, those basic facts would be useful, I think. I did find, my researcher actually found that SIGA say that the number of claims under SIGA are declining, 4,806 in 2018 to 2,300 in 2023. But obviously there are many claims left, and there is a question as to whether those claims have been settled satisfactorily. So, I would be interested in any assessment that the government could make of the number of remaining cases, and what would be the cost of remediation. My honourable friend mentioned a figure of 120,000. I have no idea how much it would actually be, but even if it was 10,000 a case, that is a great deal of money, and the people who are victims are probably in no position to pay. I would be also interested in the demographic makeup of the group of victims. Are they, as I suspect, older and disabled people, poorer people actually, some of them, so that we can get a grip on the size and nature of the problem. And one must think, what do victims actually want? Well, I'm in no position to say that, but I would guess, definitely, I think they want the damp fixed, they want the dry rot fixed if there's that there. They want their homes restored to the previous standard. They would like an acknowledgement of the faults, that they are victims and that they have done something which should not have led to this situation. Because people, as I said, subscribe to the scheme thinking that they would save the money, that they would do something about climate change. I've asked a number of practical questions to the Minister, and I realise that she cannot answer them today, so I would be glad possibly to hear from her in writing on some of these specific points. But I think the government should shoulder what is, I think, eventually their own responsibility. That would be the right thing to do. And also it would counter any lack of confidence in other green schemes into the future. That is obviously a potential problem. Sivali is calling on the UK government to take direct control of SIGA and to ensure that it offers proper remediation to victims, not cash compensation. People want their houses fixed. It's not a matter of money. They also say that victims should be able to have an accredited surveyor to visit their homes to do a proper audit. And if they have been identified to be victims to improper CWI installation, that they should have access to government funding. Now, as I said, I have no idea how long this piece of string is, how big the problem might be, but I was interested to see the case of Fishwick near Preston, part of Preston actually, where external insulation was fitted with damage to homes and danger to residents. huge cost of remediation, and the installers had disappeared. And in that particular case, from what I understand, the National Energy Action was able to become involved and put in the appropriate work. I won't go into the report that I've had, which is rather long, but Fishwick might be a case which sets a precedent for the residents not actually being held to be responsible. So I'd be glad if the Minister either could say something about that now, or again, I would be glad to hear something from her in writing. I don't know if any of this is possible. Whatever is done is long overdue, I think. I think, actually, to finish, that is it not actually time to establish an independent inquiry, a quick one, but independent, into this entire botched CWI scheme, and that to be the basis for an early and full remedial action, whatever that might be. But people are still suffering. And as I said, I made my first speech in this place in 2014. And though things have changed to some extent, there are still people who are victims. And I think they are the least able people to fight their own cause. And I think somebody needs to take responsibility. Thank you.
That this House has considered government support for cavity wall insulation. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's a great pleasure to be here under your chairmanship. And I would like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Arvon for his very passionate speech and for reminding us with all the case studies that the people who are affected by this are individual people who live in these houses, who are daily having to live with all of these issues. And I'd like to thank him sincerely for raising this. As the Minister responsible for energy affordability and fuel poverty, I've often said that the greenest energy is the energy that you don't use. And this is why insulation is just so important. And put simply, we must really ensure that customers don't watch their money vanish, literally, through their walls whilst living in cold properties. And that's why we are improving the energy efficiency of homes. It is central to the department in doing this and helping people out of fuel poverty and also achieving net zero. But of course, today's debate is around the cavity wall insulation. And when installed correctly, it can reduce the amount of money spent on keeping a house warm, which, as we know, is critical to alleviating fuel poverty. And it can also make these homes more ready for a clean heat source at the same time. And insulation is one of the most cost-effective means of improving household efficiency. And the government, as is mentioned, has an ambition to reduce the UK's final energy consumption from buildings and industry by 15% by 2030 against the 2021 levels. But we also plan to have as many fuel-poor homes as possible, achieving an EPC rating of C by 2030. And today I'd like to cover three areas, just thinking about the schemes, also thinking about the safeguards, and of course the standards, and trying to address as much as I can the questions that have been posed today. First of all, thinking about the schemes, the cavity wall insulation has been installed under previous government schemes and continues to be installed under the Home Upgrade Scheme. The Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, the Energy Company Obligation, and then the Great British Insulation Scheme. And according to the Great British Insulation Scheme final impact assessment in 2022, it was estimated that around 5.1 million homes without cavity wall installation in Great Britain, of which 3.8 million of these are easy to treat cavities. Now, thinking about the safeguards, we have debated cavity wall insulation, debated them, as the Honourable Member quite rightly points out, previously, and certainly in 2017 and 2020, with many examples occurring before the change to the consumer protections that are here today. And, of course, I will.
She's very generous. A number of my Aberavon constituents are fighting to get some justice, really, after cavity walls being either incorrectly or inappropriately installed and real damage being done to their homes. The companies have disappeared. and no longer exist. And you've got this cavity insulation guarantee agency, which just doesn't seem to be working at all. It's cost tens of thousands of pounds for my constituents, years of stress and worry. So could the Minister just please set out what's going wrong with the CIGA and what steps is the government going to take to help my constituents sort out this absolutely appalling problem?
Yeah. Thank you. And the Honourable Member makes a really important intervention. And as we'll also know, that although this isn't within my portfolio, clearly what I will do is I will absolutely get back with as much detail as I can on individual cases as well. So that is an opportunity to and I will pass those on to the relevant places as well. And of course, I am sympathetic to the Honourable Member for Arvin and others have raised up during this debate about the problem and better understanding the scale of this problem. And at the moment, I don't have these figures. I'm not sure, in all honesty, whether I will be able to get these figures, but I'm certainly endeavouring to try and find out the numbers that are affected by this. And of course, the other thing to consider is, again, everybody has quite rightly mentioned, is that these issues have risen as a result of poorly executed cavity wall installation as well, of which I am very much aware. Unfortunately, as I've mentioned, I don't have a full view of the number of the failed cavity wall installation. And I think our understanding is that it's a relatively small proportion. However, for me, even if it's a relatively small proportion, that doesn't really justify the fact, and I do take away the fact that even if it is a small amount, that we should be having a look at that. And thinking about taking on board the situation that have been brought, thinking how we can have improvement in the future. And again, I'll refer later to the method, what we've taken on now to think about how we improve for the future, making sure that this doesn't happen again. I also, in addition, want to mention the genuine concern, as raised by the Honourable Member for Bradford South. Claims management companies and solicitors firms have contacted consumers offering to represent them in return for compensation for damage caused to their homes by the insulation. And it should be noted, again, that not all of these companies have the consumer's best interests at heart and have left the consumers facing the payment of extensive legal fees. So I would like to thank the Honourable Member for bringing that to my attention. And in order to assist consumers who suspect they have had the faulty cavity insulation installed to their homes, the Department published guidance in October 2019. And I would urge customers to follow this guidance to help to avoid becoming victims of fraudulent cavity wall insulation claims, and for information on organisations that can offer support if a problem does arrive. I'd also just like to turn to standards as well, and we have put in place these for protection of consumers. For example, energy efficient measures installed under the current government schemes include the Energy Company Obligation and the Great British Insulation Scheme. They must comply with the requirements outlined in the British Standards Institution's Good Practice Standards set out in PASS 2035 document. And this requires that installers to be certified to pass 2030 standards for any energy efficient measure they are carrying out, including cavity wall installation, demonstrating a high level of competence. And these standards will help ensure that installation is suitable for the property as described by the Honourable Member when he was talking about the way the wall was facing, but also making sure it's to the high standards while also improving the service provided to the consumers. Installers, of course I will.
Very briefly, I commend what she's saying and what has been done. I think one of the problems that has bedeviled this matter is that the unwillingness of anybody with any power to look at historical cases. In fact, one looks at the Bonfield report, which came out, I think, in 2017, possibly, specifically said we're not looking at historical cases, and it is the historical cases which are egregious, which are difficult, and, as I said, commend her, but said eventually I think we must look at the historical cases as well.
Thank you, and thank the Honourable Member for the point that's made. And in instances where consumers have concerns or are unhappy with the work that has been carried out, they should, of course, contact the installer. But I recognise, of course, that some of the installers in the historic cases that we're talking about no longer exist. And I will come to, when I get to the end, I will obviously take some final remarks. In instances where consumers are unhappy with the work that has been carried out, I say they should contact the installer. However, the insurance-backed guarantee provider offers a second layer of protection, for example, in the case that the installer ceases to trade. We agree that the industry does not always get it right, and I encourage the industry to provide appropriate remedy for the affected customers. And by mandating the requirement for installations under government-backed schemes and ensuring the Trustmark and Pass 2030 businesses undertake the work, we have helped to improve the quality of installations since 2019. And we are fully committed to protecting all consumers who have insulation products installed in their homes, as well as improving the overall consumer journey, regardless of the housing tenure or how insulation work is funded. I would welcome, finally, what I would like to do is to thank the Honourable Member for Arvin for raising in this debate what will follow in writing the questions on all the individual cases. If there are any, as I mentioned, that we could specifically look at, then of course I am happy to take those away, and I would encourage other Honourable Members to do that. I would also like to just welcome the recent research that the CMA and other organisations such as Which and the Citizens' Advice on Consumer Protection to this sector. Today, the CMA published an update to their report on consumer protection in the green heating and insulation sectors. And in response to the government announced the work we are undertaking to improve consumer protection in the green heating and insulation sectors. I would once again like to thank Chair, the Honourable Member and also the other Honourable Members for their contributions in this debate. Remembering again, as I said at the very beginning, these are people's houses that we are talking about. They are the homes that they live with. And I would encourage, if there's any individual cases that we should look at, to send on to me. Thank you.
Hal Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just thank the Minister for taking what is not an easy brief. It's a complicated, long-standing problem, and I'm grateful for the remarks that she has made, and I look forward actually to hearing either from her or from her colleague in another place, possibly with more direct responsibility. I'm also grateful for her offer to look at historical cases, and I was going to raise some. Time actually defeated us somewhat, but speaking to one of my constituents, Mr and Mrs Williams from Penysarwain, outside Caernarfon, who've been fighting for, I think, 10 years to get their CWI sorted out. I'm sure I'll be coming to her with their case and possibly others as well. There's one point that my honourable friend made about legal help, and it is really problematic. It is a specialised field, but there are no legal resources in my area, and possibly in South Wales or in the north of England either, and possibly that is a wider question. I'm very glad to say that my own university in Bangor, in the law department there, are hopefully going to start a pro bono service, which will not solve the problem, certainly not. They're not going to be qualified lawyers, but I think we'll have to look for help wherever we can actually find this, and that's one place. I'm very glad to say that. Otherwise, I thank you, Chair, for chairing, and for other honourable members for taking part. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered government support for cavity wall insulation. As many as of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. I'm not sure about the guy next to Sally Ann Hart.
It's about 15 minutes.
David Simmers has just walked in.
I tried to... Oh, there's loads. There's,
Daniel,
well, there's what, 13,
Daniel's
14
not
pages.
Darren Henry's here. Suella Braven's not here.
No, I think giving
I'm not
this
sure that Chester is straight ahead. Thank you.
So now it's debate.
No, he's not. No, he's not on this. I think it's Jonathan Lord, isn't it? The one to the left, straight ahead. Jonathan Lord, I'm pretty sure. Oh,